Hey Optimancers, Chris here. In this series I've been discussing the ranks of every subclass in the game, and so far I've looked at all the Artificers, Barbarians, Bards, and Clerics. Here's where our rankings currently stand. So, from full casting Bards to full casting Clerics to full casting Druids, let's see how the Druids stack up. If you'd like to support this content, please check the link in the video description for my Patreon. Patrons of this channel can see these videos early and non-monetized, and my top-level patrons can join me to play some D&D each month. Today I'd like to recognize these top-level patrons: Jay Gemmel, James Sprague, James Thomas, John Matera, John Cripps, Jonathan Haynes, Joseph Robideau, Joseph Van Horn, Joshua Samuel Lappel, and Justin Bennington. Thank you all so much for your support. Let's get started. Here's where I go over how the ranking system works. If you've watched the previous videos, you've seen this before. What you can do is go to the timeline on the bottom of the video, click on the next chapter, and it'll take you right past that part. So here is how it will work. I will not be discussing any subclass that is not official content. So subclasses that are third-party or playtest material are not included. This is a power ranking, so I'm not taking into account how well they are designed in this ranking or my personal preference. This will take into account how powerful they are as a single class build, as well as how powerful they are when multi-classed. I will be assuming feats are allowed and used, and that all the optional class features in Tash's Cauldron of Everything are allowed as well. Just some things to note as well. Features are weighted by how soon they are received. A feature you get at level 3 is much more valuable than a feature you get at level 10, because these features see way more gameplay when you actually play the subclass. So this is not a comparison of which of these subclasses are more powerful at 20th level. I don't think that's very relevant to players. This is a comparison as to which you will find most powerful, assuming you are starting at low level and advancing levels through gameplay. A feature you have for 100% of that time is 5 times more valuable than a feature you're going to have for 20%. And although I will consider all 3 pillars of gameplay, I will be weighing the combat tier most heavily. The combat tier tends to be the tier that is most reliant on mechanics, and mechanics is what I'm looking at here. I also assume you will not be playing as a solo character. So features that work well with teammates, or even better, improve your teammates, will be considered in the ranking. Now before we begin, I'm going to address a couple common misconceptions before they come up. A bad feature does not make a subclass less powerful. I can add 10 terrible and practically useless features to the most powerful subclasses, and they're still the most powerful. I'm only looking at features that make a subclass better. Secondly, just because a feature can be replicated with a feat does not mean the feature isn't good. Feats are not free, and they can be very powerful. They can even be more powerful than a subclass feature. So a feature that can be replicated by a good feat can still be a great feature, improving the power level of the subclass. And the person playing that subclass has 1 extra feat they can use on any of the many potent feats in the game. I guarantee you're not going to have enough feats, and having 1 more is a big benefit. These rankings, of course, are subjective, and I don't expect anyone to agree with them in their entirety. And I do have some personal biases, which will probably become apparent. I like spells. I think they can be very powerful. And that's going to be clear enough as we move forward. Also, I should say, I like to make my saving throws, and I don't care who knows it. Give me a way to do that more reliably, and I'm likely to consider a subclass more powerful because of it. Finally, I don't assume you will be limited to 1 encounter per day. I don't assume you will have short rests whenever you want. So features that can be used more often I consider to be more powerful than single-use ones. Now, this is a very common rating system in D&D for the ranking of classes and subclasses, and it includes anywhere from the S tier being the highest and the D tier being the lowest, and I will not be using it. Instead, I'll be using this expanded tier chart that includes an E and F tier. Here are the criteria I will be ranking the subclasses with. If I give a subclass an S tier ranking, I don't just think it's powerful. I think it's probably too powerful. I think there are some potentially game-breaking mechanics involved, and these are going to come into play without requiring high-level play at all. My issue with these subclasses is you have a real possibility of invalidating other player character features. This can lead to overshadowing other players, and so if you're a power gamer, these options are for you. If you aren't, I think I would think carefully before selecting an S tier subclass. If I give a subclass an A tier ranking, I think it's a very powerful option. Characters using an A tier subclass are easy to optimize and have features that should be showstoppers in gameplay, stomping down challenges with abandon. We may not break the game, but we're definitely going to make it a fair bit easier. If I give a subclass a B tier ranking, I think it's a good subclass. Optimizing a B tier subclass should result in a very effective character that has a strong contribution to a party of characters. Even with limited optimization, a B tier subclass is probably still going to be reasonably effective. If I give a subclass a C tier ranking, I think it's a decent option. Optimizing a C tier subclass may require a bit more thought about how to make the best use of the features, but they can still be quite effective if handled with some thought and consideration. If I give a subclass a D tier ranking, I think it's serviceable. Optimizing a D tier rank subclass will lead to a decent character that can usually still pull their weight, but I wouldn't expect to stand out. If I give a subclass an E tier ranking, I think it's a weaker option. An E tier subclass needs some extra effort to make a character that contributes effectively at all, or perhaps the contributions they make end up being extremely narrow, or rely heavily on other characters helping them out. It's still possible to make a character that can be somewhat effective with an E tier subclass, but if you just play it as it's presented, you can probably expect a disappointing experience. If I give a subclass an F tier ranking, I think it's basically unredeemable. An F tier ranked subclass differentiates from an E tier subclass because it is bound to disappoint, and there just aren't any good ways to optimize it to make it worthwhile. And the F tier subclasses, along with the S tier subclasses, I think can be a problem when considering a team of players because they create pretty overwhelming imbalance. Subclasses aren't balanced against each other, and that's normally okay. But when you have these extreme cases on either end, it can weaken the game. When subclasses receive the same rank, I will be placing subclasses I think are more potent, more to the left of the chart, with the weaker further to the right. So at the end of this series, I will have a comprehensive list from top to bottom of every class and subclass combination in the game, all 114 of them. So first off, let's look at what the Druid class provides as a chassis for a character. So we get D8 hit points, a mismatch of weapon proficiencies. The standout there is Scimitar, since most Druids will have a good dexterity. So Scimitar probably isn't as good as a Rapier, but better than a Dagger. Wisdom and Intelligence saving throws, and the standard 2 skill proficiencies. The most notable thing for Druids in regards to proficiencies is armor. They gain shield proficiency, as well as light and medium armor, but they have a really significant prohibition against the use of shields or armor made of metal. So this is objectively worse than just not having medium armor proficiency in the first place, because we can't even get around this by multiclassing or through feats. Even the shield proficiency is affected, because although wooden shields provide the same protection as any other shield, you can't count on any magical shields you find during the gameplay to be wooden shields. So this leads to the question, just what armors can a druid wear? I mean, almost every armor is going to be a mix of metal and leather. Plate armor still has leather straps, and leather armor is still hardened boiled leather, so you're still likely using some metal to bind the pieces together. Now when I see the words made of metal, I see a big difference between that and contains metal. Plate armor may have straps, but it's clearly made of metal, or at least primarily of metal. Studded leather may have metal studs and rivets, but I would say it's still clearly made of leather, or at least primarily of leather. So, can a druid wear armor if it contains metal at all? It seems that the intent of the designers is that if it has a little bit of metal, that's not a problem. Chris Perkins says that studded leather doesn't count as metal armor in his game, and if we look at Sage advice, we can see that studded leather armor is considered to be a standard armor for druids. I think the most reasonable answer is that if the armor or shield is made primarily of metal, it's prohibited. Otherwise, you're okay. I can't guarantee, though, that's how it's going to be seen at every table, including the table of Chris Perkins. But I do think it's the most reasonable answer. And when I do these ratings, I need to make an assumption there, and that's the assumption I'm going to make. That's when we get back to shields. Because if a shield needs to be primarily metal for it to be prohibited, we really should be okay for 99% of shields. Historically, we see shields, even for the metal armor-clad knight, that are primarily made of wood. They may have metal rim, they may have a metal boss, but the lion's share of the shield is still wood. And when we see a shield standard weight of 6 pounds, I think that makes it pretty clear that it's not a huge slab of steel. So when a magical shield becomes available, I would expect, at least in most cases, we should be okay. So what I would assume is the standard armor set of a druid would be studded leather and a shield. And if we mix that with, say, a 16 dexterity, which is very achievable right from first level, that's a base 17 armor class, which frankly is going to be as good or better than your standard fighter, because more often than not, fighters don't wear shields. So this whole metal armor thing really isn't the end of the world. We can still sport a pretty decent armor class, probably one less than the standard cleric, but more than any other full caster at level 1. The difference is the shield. The shield makes a difference. 2 armor class is a pretty big deal. Where I think this hurts most for us, though, is with multiclassing, because that prohibition will trump whatever proficiencies we get with armor. That means we aren't going to see much in the way of druid dips on optimized builds, except sometimes 2 levels of Moon Druid, which we'll talk about more later. The most iconic ability for druids is Wild Shape. It is gained at level 2, and technically it does scale with our level. But that scaling is minimal, and it caps at level 8. What I find is, without any subclass boosts, Wild Shape is of minimal value in combat right at level 2, and by level 5 it is totally obsolete. The main value of Wild Shape ends up being utility, and this is usually turning into something that would otherwise normally not attract attention, like a spider or something, or maybe gaining a movement mode you normally wouldn't have, and then using it for scouting. At level 8, we can take flying forms, allowing for improved scouting options. And this meant generally, Wild Shape occasionally had a use, but with 2 uses per short rest. Most of the time, it would not get used. That's changed with Tasha's optional class features, because now we can spend a Wild Shape and cast a Find Familiar spell without a material component. But unlike the normal spell, which basically lasts indefinitely, ours has the same duration as our Wild Shape would have had. Still, Familiars are useful, and they can be useful in combat as well. So at least all Druid subclasses will have some way to get some use out of their Wild Shape for both uses per short rest. After Wild Shape, there really isn't much in the way of class features beyond spellcasting. A couple things at very high level, but mostly it's spells in Wild Shape for Druids. So let's talk about how good a spellcaster a Druid is. Our casting is Wisdom based, and we have preparations of our Druid level plus our Wisdom bonus. This is about the same as a Wizard, better than a Sorcerer, but significantly less than a Cleric. We have cantrip casting, but we only get 2 cantrips to start, and we max out at 4 cantrips at 10th level. This makes our cantrip selections pretty tight, especially considering the Druid cantrip list has a fair number of interesting options. Druids are ritual casters, and although they're not supporting the best ritual spell list, standards like Detect Magic, Water Walk, and Water Breathing are available. Commune with Nature is actually quite a good ritual and not available to other ritual casters. And Tash has added Augury and Divination to their spell list, which gives some other good options. Like Clerics, a Druid can change out their preparations with a long rest and then choose any spells from their spell list. Unlike Clerics, I actually see Druids taking advantage of this feature more often. And I think it has a lot to do with the spell list itself. So let's talk about that. I have heard from several players in online discussion that the Druid spell list is really about conjure animals. And if a DM wasn't to allow conjure animals, which I've seen on multiple occasions, usually due to having 8 creatures suddenly pop up in a battle, slowing down gameplay and being cumbersome, they see no reason to play a Druid. Personally, I see much more to the Druid spell list than I think they do. The strengths of a Druid spell list include summoning, definitely, and conjure animals is the premier option for summoning. But there's some other really good summon options available as well. Summon Beast is a great spell for 2nd level, and Conjure Elemental is a strong 5th level option. And we have some decent options in between as well. Even without Conjure Animals, Druid's ability at summoning is competitive with any other class. Another area where the Druid spell list is very strong, and I mean even arguably the best, is battlefield controlling. From level 1 spells up, we see many of the best battlefield control spells in the game, from Entangle to Sleet Storm to Wall of Stone and Transmute Rock. When it comes to healing spells, I would argue that Druids actually have the best spells in the game. Going from Goodberry, which is probably the best 1st level healing spell, to the various restorations, Revivify, which is the best Raise Dead option, Heal, which is the best mid-combat heal before 9th level spells, and more. Even after the Healing Spirit errata that nerfed it to below average for a healing spell, if healing is what you want to do, Druid remains a strong choice. If you want to do blasting, Druid's not your best option, but there are some at least okay area of effect blast options. Certainly more than a Cleric or a Bard. However, there are 2 gaps in Druid spellcasting that prevent it from being top tier. The first is defensive options. There's a few in there, like Absorb Elements and Protection from Poison, but significantly less than Wizards or Sorcerers. The other main gap I see is in mobility spell options. No Fly, no Misty Step, no Dimension Door, no Thunder Step, and no really good alternates to those spells either. Our first major mobility option is Tree Stride, and that's a 5th level spell, and as the name implies, requires trees. Windwalk is our first real fly spell, and that's 6th level. So it's not that there's no options, but they just aren't as good, and they come on like way later. So the spell list for Druids is a mixed bag. They are really good at a number of things, more than just summoning. And there's also some gaps you're absolutely going to feel. So the Druid spell list is somewhere in the middle. I would say it's better than Clerics, and it's likely better than the Bard spell list as well, at least before Magical Secrets comes into play, and probably better than Warlocks too. Though Bards and Warlocks, I'd say that's debatable, but their spell list, it's not in the realm of Wizard spell lists or even Sorcerer spell lists. So Druids on their own are a middle-of-the-road full caster, with Wild Shape and their unique armor situation. A Druid gets their subclass at level 2, which is earlier than some. Let's see what the subclasses offer. So Druids get their subclass features at levels 2, 6, 10, and 14. 14 is really late in gameplay, so I'm not really going to talk about those. 10th is fairly late as well, but it should still find a chance to exist at least near the end of most full campaigns. So I'll talk about it a little bit, but I'm going to be putting low weight on it. As usual, I'll be weighting the features gained earlier much more heavily. Our first Druid subclass is the Circle of Dreams. We first saw this subclass in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. At 2nd level, we get Balm of the Summer Court. This is a healing option that has a number of really nice aspects. First, it's a bonus action, but it's way better than a healing word spell because it's not a spell. So we don't face the restrictions that casting a bonus action spell imposes on the rest of our turn. The range here is also really good at 120 feet. The downsides are you don't get a lot of dice, 1 per level of Druid, and you can't spend them all at once either. The second problem is we only recover them on a long rest. So what Bomb of Summer Court ends up being is a great way to immediately bring up a downed ally with a bonus action that we can do multiple times per day. But in terms of actual hit points recovered over a long rest, the total is never going to be all that impressive. But if we wanted to compare to determine how good this ability is, take a look at the Grave Cleric. They could cast Spare the Dying as a bonus action with range. This is way better than that, because it's not a spell, so it doesn't have the bonus action casting of a spell messing up our action. It has greater range, and it actually brings our ally up. And if that is all we're using this for, we're not going to likely run out of uses, so this is just objectively better, and quite a bit so. So if we're looking at straight hit point recovery, it doesn't match what we can do with spells, though I guess it does pad it somewhat. And overall, this is a decent feature. At level 6 we get Hearth of Moonlight and Shadow, which technically is a protection to the party during rests, but I have to say it's a pretty slight protection. You get some decent bonuses to stealth and perception, and the boost to perception during a rest I think is actually quite useful, and it conceals light from flames such as a campfire, and it's not limited in use, and it requires no casting time like a ritual will. Still, at this level we're looking at options like Leomund's Tiny Hut for some classes, not druids. Druids don't get Tiny Hut. And this really doesn't compare defensively. I don't think it's useless. I mean, I will gladly take a +5 perception for my watch, but if I'm considering a build that helps ensure a safe rest, Circle of Dreams is not the way I'm going to go. So it's not useless, but it is not great. At 10th level we get Hidden Paths, which is a short-range teleport. It's very limited in use, and it's only recovered on a long rest. But it's a bonus action, again giving us a bonus action option that doesn't mess up our action spellcasting, and we can choose to teleport a creature we touch instead. And that's not as good as bringing along a passenger, but it's a lot better than just having self-only options. And druids, as I mentioned, are not strong when it comes to mobility options with spellcasting. So when a Dreams druid gains this ability, then this is going to be the best combat mobility option they have at this level. So I think this is more impressive on a druid than, say, on a wizard. So I think it's pretty good. So we end up with a decent level 2 option, a weaker level 6 option, and a decent level 10 option. Built on the decent druid chassis, and a Dreams druid is going to do just fine. But there's nothing here that stands out as overly effective beyond what all druids can do with spells. So I think we have to give this a C on that basis. Dreams druids should be good enough, but beyond the druid spells there's not much beyond minor heals until higher levels. Our next subclass is Circle of the Land. This is one of the original subclasses from the Player's Handbook. At level 2, we start with a bonus cantrip, which can be any druid cantrip of our choice. So that's okay, as I mentioned, druid is cantrip light. And then we get natural recovery, which is going to allow spell slot recovery equal to 1/2 our druid level when we take a short rest. This is usable once per long rest, so at 2nd level, this is 1 extra 1st level spell slot. And then at 20th level, it's 10 levels of spell slots up to 5th level. So it could be 2 5th level slots, or it could be 4 1st level slots and 3 2nd level slots. That and the cantrip are all that land get at 2nd level. What land does get at 3rd level are the circle spells. You get to choose from 8 different spell suites. There's one thing all 8 have in common. Most of the spells are not very exciting. Still, there are some standout spells. Arctic, for example, has Slow. It's normally not available to druids, and it does something druids normally aren't good at: mass targeted debuffing. Coast has a couple standout spells, Mirror Image and Misty Step, both filling gaps in the druid spell list, though the higher levels are far less valuable. Underdark has Web. It's a very good 2nd level battlefield control, though I will say battlefield control is a category of spells we already have well represented, and even with 2nd level spells. Most of the spells on these lists are druid spells. Still, that's 8 extra preparations by 9th level. Honestly though, overall, like with the clerical domain lists, these are mixed. Then we get Land Stride at 6th level, which allows us to move through non-magical difficult terrain without extra movement, and movement through non-magical plants isn't impeded. And we get advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically created or manipulated to restrict movement. And this one is a stinker. Moving through non-magical difficult terrain at full speed is okay, and it will occasionally come up, but occasionally. And the rest of this, maybe never. Then at 10th level, we cannot be charmed or frightened by elementals or fae, so wildly circumstantial. And we're immune to disease, which is ho-hum, and we're immune to poison. And I'll say that poison immunity is pretty good. So the immunity to poison saves this one from being another stinker. So with land, we get no wild shape alternate features, but fortunately, we can at least now use them for Find Familiar, and we do get some extra spell slots, and that is super welcome. And an additional cantrip, not huge, but okay. And some additional spell preparations, which used to be unique, but not anymore. And that feature is held by multiple Druid subclasses. That, in my opinion, gets some stronger other features. Still, you can make a perfectly decent land druid, and the extra spells and castings place it right in front of dreams, in my opinion. Then we get to the other player's handbook subclass, Circle of the Moon. At 2nd level, we get 2 features, but they basically go together. Combat Wild Shape and Circle of Forms combine to pump up your Wild Shape feature. Combat Wild Shape allows you to use Wild Shape as a bonus action, so you can transform and then attack all on the same turn. It also allows you to expend your spell slots while you're in Wild Shape to regain 1d8 hit points per spell slot expended. And a d8 per spell level is not very good, but on the other hand, if you find yourself Wild Shape most of the time, you may not be using your spell slots for anything else, so then you might as well heal a bit. Circle Forms is something we need to talk about though. This allows you to select a challenge rating 1 creature to Wild Shape into at level 2. This increases to challenge rating 2 at level 6, challenge rating 3 at level 9, challenge rating 4 at level 12, challenge rating 5 at level 15, and finally challenge rating 6 at 18th level. And I don't know whether the designers made a mistake here, or if they just got frustrated trying to find a scale that worked, so that eventually maybe they just threw their hands up in the air and they just gave up. But this scale does not work, like even a little bit. For example, here's a challenge rating 1 creature, in this case a brown bear. So our level 2 full spellcasting druid can use their Wild Shape feature to turn into a brown bear twice per short rest. Each time they do so, they get an additional 34 hit points, because you lose all these hit points, you still have your full hit points as druid. And again, this is level 2. A barbarian at this level has about 25 hit points total. Assuming 1 short rest, the moon druid, just doing brown bear exclusively, has 132 additional hit points, as in on top of their own. 132 hit points is going to be at least 5 times as many hit points as the next highest in the party, and in most cases more than that. But it's not just hit points. We get 2 attacks per action. You know who else gets 2 attacks per action at level 2? Nobody. Some might, and I mean might, have a bonus action attack, or they might have action surge so they could attack 1 additional time, but nobody else in the game is getting 2 attacks with their action as a regular thing at level 2. And these attacks have a +6 to hit, which is probably a bigger bonus than anyone else in the party. Average damage of these attacks is about 10, so the same as a fighter with a 16 strength wielding a 2-handed sword, except twice as much because we get 2 attacks, and our to hit bonus is going to be bigger. So compared to that strength 16 fighter wielding a 2-handed sword, we can expect to do more than twice as much damage, and we can expect to be able to take more than 5 times as much damage. And this is just the flat brown bear. We still keep our intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, our skill and saving throw proficiencies. We can still continue to concentrate on previously cast spells, retain class features, racial features, and the benefits of feats, as long as the brown bear is physically capable of benefiting from them. And because it's not a spell, it can't be dispelled or countered. Basically, the enemy just needs to do that 34 hit points damage to bring you back to full health and abilities in your druid form, at which point you can use your bonus action and you're back to full brown bear. So that enemy, which was intended to take on second level characters, needs to do 68 hit points of damage for you to be a full health druid with full spell levels. Of course, they will be long dead before then. Except this is even worse, because we're not limited to brown bear. Deinonychus gives us a medium-sized form, just in case large size is inconvenient, and now we get 3 attacks with our action. So triple any other character, and we can pounce on the enemy, and it has to make a save or fall prone. And then if it falls prone, we can make a bonus action attack too, so count them, 4 attacks. Dire wolves have pack tactics without the sunlight sensitivity of like a kobold, and they can move at 50 feet on their turn. The giant hyena can take a reaction to move and attack again whenever it drops an enemy with an attack, and it also has a movement of 50, and it has 45 hit points. So now you get an additional 90 additional hit points per short rest. At level 2, 90 additional hit points per short rest. The giant spider has spider climbing, of course, and has a ranged attack that restrains the enemy, or even better, be an ice spider and be exactly the same except add cold resistance. You want a lot of speed? Moorbounder has a base speed of 70 and can long jump 40 feet. This is level 2, and I have not given you an exhaustive list, and frankly, no one can give you an exhaustive list, since every time a new official beast of challenge rating 1 or lower is added to the game, the Moon Druid's options increase. This is how bad it is. I've been playing this game since the beginning, and I have played low levels more than high levels. Moon Druid is the only subclass out of the player's handbook I have never played at low level, and I never will. And anytime I play low level, if someone else plays a Moon Druid, I immediately regret joining that game. But here's the thing about Moon Druid's wild shape. The scaling is terrible. So once again, here's the brown bear. We can do this at level 2. So we go up 4 levels. So our level has now tripled. Our spell casting has gone from first level spells to third level spells. So that is tripled in power. And we can now take the form of a challenge rating 2 creature. Here's our challenge rating 2 bear, the polar bear. Our hit points went from 34 to 42. Our attack rolls went up by +1 to hit, from +6 to +7, and we do 1 more point of damage on attacks. I mean, this is technically better, but it's not much better. Our levels tripled, and our wild shape improved by about 15%. So let's add 6 more levels. So now we're level 12, and we can become a CR4 creature. Here's an elephant. Hit points of our character have gone up by a factor of 6. Hit points of our wild shapes, about a third of that. And our attacks, arguably, haven't really improved at all. And that's what it's like. At second level, a Moon Druid wrecks the game. But the feature that wrecks the game at that level scales so dramatically poorly that it ends up being matched by other characters around level 5 or 6, then surpassed by the other characters, and then surpassed so greatly by the other characters that the Moon Druid is going to feel ineffective in combat if they're wild-shaped. So like I said, the scale here is problematic. In my experience, a Moon Druid will wreck your game from levels 2 to 4, automatically overshadowing the other characters. At level 5, they aren't overshadowing anymore, but Wild Shape is still really good. A few more levels and the Moon Druid in Wild Shape is not doing as well if they're Wild Shaped. They're probably better off staying in Druid form and casting spells most of the time. And it's a real shame, because this is the only subclass that can really use Wild Shape effectively in combat. But it swings from being way, way, way too powerful to being maybe not powerful enough. and just in a handful of levels. It almost makes it so it's not worth it to stick with Moon Druid past level 2 if Wild Shape was the reason you took Druid. So we see Moon Druid 2 mixed with Barbarians and other martial classes, and that can make Wild Shape work a bit longer, but it is going to peter out, and you've got these 2 levels on your build that end up not doing much for you anymore. At level 6, our attacks are treated as magical when we're Wild Shaped, and then at level 10, we can use both our Wild Shapes to take the form of an Elemental. This actually can be quite strong defensively because Elementals do have a lot of hit points, a lot of resistances, and a lot of condition immunities. The problem will remain in offense because we still can't cast spells in Wild Shape. Still, an Elemental can take a lot of punishment and has some unique features like sending enemies flying or gliding through earth, that kind of thing. Then at level 20, as you can imagine, when we cast in Wild Shape and we can Wild Shape every round as a bonus action, we become the most powerful Druid again. So the Moon Druid, as far as our tier list, is actually kind of hard to place, because I think if you play at certain levels, they can work just fine. And although Wild Shape at those levels isn't amazing, it's still somewhat useful, and you're still a full caster with a fairly good Druid spell list. But at level 2, the Moon Druid overshadows everyone. At level 3, they overshadow everyone. At level 4, they overshadow everyone. So does the Moon Druid's Wild Shape have a real possibility of invalidating the features of other player characters? Yes, I think it's almost certainly going to in most campaigns, because most campaigns end up running those level 2 through 4 levels. And I think it will invalidate those features for a significant portion of time, because these levels see play constantly. And if I'm going to follow my own rules, then the Moon Druid has to rank S. And with the other subclasses ranked S, this is not an endorsement. If you're going to join a campaign at level 5 or higher, I think I can safely recommend the Moon Druid. And depending on the level, it's probably going to be in the B range overall. But if it is before level 5, I highly recommend against it. But I can't deny the power level is higher than any other Druid, or probably anybody else in your party too, including the other S-rank subclasses in this ranking, and is going to overshadow the other player characters if you use Wild Shape, guaranteed. That brings us to our next Druid subclass, the Circle of the Shepherd. This was first seen in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. At second level, we get Speech of the Woods that provides a free language proficiency, and you can speak with animals. Speak with Animals is a first level spell a Druid can get that they can cast as a ritual. So this is nice, saves the time to cast the ritual, and you don't need to prepare a spell. Then we get our big second level feature, which is the Spirit Totem. You can summon the Spirit Totem as a bonus action and move it with your bonus action. It lasts for just 1 minute, and it creates a 30-foot aura that does one of 3 things. And we can use this once per short rest. The first is the Bear Spirit, which provides temporary hit points when it's first summoned to creatures of your choice in the aura. It does scale. It's a bit like Twilight Cleric's Channel Divinity, except it only delivers the temporary hit points once, so it's not broken. Then, while the aura persists, allies get advantage on strength checks and saving throws while in the aura. Now, generally, I don't expect a lot of strength saving throws, but 5 plus your Druid level is a fair number of hit points to award to allies. It's best right at second level, when 7 temporary hit points is quite a bit, but still it does scale, so it is always reasonable. The second option is the Hawk Spirit, which gives you a reaction where you can give an ally advantage on 1 attack roll, and everyone in the aura gets advantage on perception rolls. And this one is by far my least favorite. Advantage on perception might be nice if we had some duration, but advantage on perception for 1 minute? And then we're using our reaction to have 1 attack have advantage? These are really small benefits. The final option is the Unicorn Spirit. The first thing it does is grant advantage on all ability checks to detect creatures in the Spirit's aura. Since the Hawk Spirit provides advantage on perception checks, I could swear we already had an option to do this. The second is when you cast a spell that restores hit points to any creature, each creature of your choice in the aura also gains hit points equal to your Druid level. So this needs a number of wounded allies to be worth it, but if you do have a number of allies to be healed, this does become an efficient way to do it. So at second level when we first get this, it's okay. Some Tempest allies is nice, or if the party gets hit by an area of effect, the Unicorn might be useful. But when this ability really shines is level 5, when we use it to boost a Conjure Animal spell. So let's say you cast Conjure Animals and you get 8 giant frogs. They normally have 18 hit points each, but with the Bear Totem, you're adding another 10 in temporary hit points. Never mind the 10 temporary hit points to the party. Or perhaps during a battle, using the Unicorn Spirit to heal all the summoned creatures by 5 hit points, potentially every round. So this ability starts out decent, but it becomes pretty good later on. The biggest drawback of this feature is the once per short rest, combined with a short duration, which pretty much ensures it's one battle per short rest. At level 6, when we cast a summoning spell that summons beasts or fae, they gain 2 additional benefits. The first is they gain 2 extra hit points per hit die. The second is that the damage from their natural weapons is considered magical. So again, we get a feature that works really well with Conjure Animals. Those same giant frogs now get an additional 8 hit points and have magical attacks. The magical attacks part is really important if you want your Conjure Animal spell to be an effective source of damage, as creatures resistant or even immune to the attacks of conjured animals without this feature become pretty much the norm eventually. So once again, we have a feature that is pretty good and boosts one particular spell. I should point out, this feature doesn't work properly with the summoning options in Tasha's. I mean, a beast summoned through the Summon Beast spell still does get magical attacks, so that's good, but these spells don't provide hit dice for the creatures summoned, which means as written, they don't get any extra hit points for this feature. This also doesn't work with Conjure Elemental, since it's neither beast nor fae. It also doesn't work with Giant Insect, since we're transforming creatures rather than summoning them. So it works with Conjure Animals, Conjure Woodland Beings, and Conjure Fae. Still, if summoning is what you want to specialize in, these are good spells to boost, and this feature does that very well. At 10th level, we get Guardian Spirit, which once again boosts our summoning of beasts or fae. Now, if they end their turn in the Spirit Totem's aura, they regain a number of hit points equal to half the Shepherd Druid's level. So, like a half-power Unicorn Spirit, but no healing spell need be cast. So, our second level feature, if it's applied only to our party, is fine. If we apply it to a bunch of pets, then it's quite good. Our 6th and 10th level features really specialize us even further into these specific summoning spells. Now, here's the thing, summoning is really good, and Conjure Animals is a really good spell, and it even scales fairly well. And with the boost this subclass provides, it becomes an even better spell, and doesn't face the normal diminishment this spell normally faces. So Shepherd Druids become ultra specialists, but their specialization is really powerful. Enough, I would say, to give them an A ranking on our ranking chart. When I've played Shepherd Druids, I do feel a bit like a one-trick pony, gotta admit, because you feel like you gotta cast all your spell slots on these summoning spells, so you keep doing the same thing over and over. So, one-trick pony, but it's a good trick. That takes us to Circle of Spores. We first saw this in Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica, and it was reprinted in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Spores, just like land druids, have circle spells. These spells are a mixed bag, but more spells is more spells. The one thing here, though, is we really just don't get to choose amongst several different spell suites. This is what we get. Now, Chill Touch is actually not a bad addition. With a 120-foot range, it definitely outclasses the range of any Druid attack cantrips. Druid attack cantrips always have very limited range. There's a few other decent spells here too. Blindness, Deafness, Animate Dead, even Confusion. But most of the spells here aren't very good. Then we get to Halo of Spores. And if you watch the introduction on how I was going to do rankings, I mentioned then that I don't consider a bad feature to make a subclass any worse than if it didn't have that feature. This is one of those features. Halo of Spores is really not good, but Spores gets more than one second level feature. So let's just pretend for a moment that Halo of Spores doesn't exist. What do we get? Well, we get Symbiotic Entity, and this requires the use of a wild shape, which is completely doable for the reasons previously mentioned. First, it makes our terrible Halo of Spores feature slightly less terrible, but still terrible, so let's continue to ignore that. Second, our melee weapon does an additional D6 necrotic damage. Now, druids are not known for being great weapon users, and this does not change that. But, you know what? If we're a druid that somehow gets access to a melee cantrip, like Green Flame Blade or Booming Blade, this does work with those, since it doesn't require the attack action. So it would make them a bit better. This has improved since the initial printing, when it was lousy poison damage. The main thing here, though, is the temporary hit points. When we use this feature, we get 4 temporary hit points for each level in Druid we have. Think about that. If we're second level, that's 16 temporary hit points per short rest. At 10th level, that's 80 temporary hit points per short rest. And at 10th level, we may have somewhere around 80 hit points total. So it's like tripling your hit point durability every short rest. That is a lot of temporary hit points. It's not as dramatic at lower levels, but the scaling here, 4 per level. Most of these features that provide temporary hit points provide 1 additional temporary hit point per level. This is quadruple that much. So the scaling here is really, really good. And I just want to point out as well that the way this feature is structured in the wording, the Halo of Spores boost and the melee damage boosts are limited to 10 minutes maximum. But the temporary hit points last until they're lost or we complete a long rest. They aren't subject to the 10-minute limit. Now, I mentioned earlier how a Moon Druid could put up a lot of extra hit points through Wild Shape. But as levels increase, so does our ability to cast spells, and temporary hit points don't interfere with your ability to cast spells, and Wild Shape does. Or at least, it does until astronomical levels. So we can't really compare these. And I actually think if we only got the temporary hit points, I think Spores Druid would do okay. At 6th level, we get Fungal Infestation. This is a very cool ability. But in terms of strength, well, it's not bad. If a beast or humanoid dies within 10 feet of us, we can use our reaction to raise it as a zombie with 1 hit point for 1 hour. Now, 1 hit point is nothing, of course. But zombies have this feature called Undead Fortitude, where they get a Constitution save when they take damage that would drop them to 0 hit points. And if they make that save, they drop to 1 hit point instead. So this zombie could still potentially take multiple hits. But 1 zombie does not make a big difference in combat. But the biggest limitation here is needing a beast or a humanoid that is small size or bigger to die within 10 feet of us. In most combats, we're not fighting either. So this becomes circumstantial. And I kind of hesitate to say this, but I will say if you are a terribly awful character, you could bring along some poor defenseless sheep. No, I won't say any more. Then our 10th level Spreading Spores feature allows us, well, our Symbiotic Entity feature is active, to do a bonus action that is still based on our bad Halo of Spores feature, so this feature becomes bad too. Though, you know what? It doesn't drain our reaction every turn, and it's a bonus action to set up. So yeah, it's still not great, but not quite useless. I mean, basically, you get a small area of effect, persistent effect, that doesn't use our concentration. It's a bonus action to set up, so the cost is pretty cheap actually. And it's basically a con save or take, D10 necrotic damage each round in the effect. So, still not great. So the standout feature here are the 4 temporary hit points per level with a wild shape use. And that's really quite good. Then we get a so-so level 6 feature, and we're probably on par with the Dreams Druid at this point. But then we add the extra spell preparations, and now we spring ahead. but we're still solidly in C territory at this point. That takes us to our next subclass, the Circle of Stars. This is a newer subclass from Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So these Tasha subclasses really bring it at second level. The first thing we get is the star map, which provides 3 benefits. The first, we know the guidance cantrip. Now, guidance is already on the Druid spell list, but as I mentioned before, Druids can be a bit cantrip starved. So getting an extra cantrip, and one that I was certain to take, is welcome. Then we get the Guiding Bolt spell as a free preparation. This normally is not a Druid spell, and if you want a single target blast spell, then it's the best one for first level. But honestly, that's not a high bar, and I would consider this a pretty unspectacular addition. But we can cast that Guiding Bolt spell without expending a spell slot a number of times per long rest equal to our proficiency bonus. And that's pretty good. I mean, at second level, that's taking 3 first level spells we can cast and bumping it up to 5. Now, when I first reviewed the Stars Druid, I had a lot of comments thinking these free castings would allow us to cast Guiding Bolt at higher level castings once those castings were available to us. So, for example, when we reached 5th level as a Druid, these players thought that that meant that you could use the Guiding Bolt as a 3rd level spell. That is incorrect. When you have a feature that allows you to cast a spell, you cast it at the lowest level unless the feature specifically says otherwise. So these free castings are always 1st level spells. Still, at pretty much any level, except arguably maybe at the highest levels, this is still better than flinging a cantrip with your action. But is it as good as the other 1st level spells we could probably cast as a Druid? I'd say probably not. But it is pretty potent to be able to do it over and over again. And at the lower levels, we're definitely going to notice this benefit when we want to do damage to a single target in a round. Then we get Starry Form, which provides 3 additional options for our wild shape uses. All 3 require a bonus action to set up, and they're all pretty good. The first one gives us a bonus action attack for a d8 plus our wisdom modifier, which is middle of the road for bonus action attack options. Second allows us to restore a d8 plus our wisdom modifier hit points to ourselves or another creature whenever we cast a spell that restores hit points. So a significant boost to our healing. Maybe even double or more depending on the healing spells we're using. The third gives us a boost to intelligence and wisdom checks and to constitution saving throws to maintain concentration. The concentration boost is enough to ensure we never fail a concentration save for damage unless the damage is very high. In all cases, these boosts, which are really good, last for 10 minutes. And that is really my main criticism of this ability, as 10 minutes isn't bad, but it's not enough to be confident you will always have this up in combat. You may, it really depends on your adventuring day. Either way, Stars is making out great at level 2 with multiple strong features. Our level 6 feature is Cosmic Omen, which provides a number of d6s we can apply as a boost to an ability check, saving throw, or attack roll, or as a penalty, depending on a random result at the beginning of the day. They require a reaction to use, and you can apply them to your own rolls or another creature within 30 feet of you. You do not get very many of these dice, just 1 per proficiency bonus per long rest. I also noticed something when I was reviewing this subclass, that the ability is phrased whenever a creature within 30 feet of you is about to make an attack roll, saving throw, or ability check. So that wording means that the bonus or penalty must be declared before the initial check is made, and that is a huge downside. Dice or modifiers that can be applied after the roll is made are just way better than ones that are done before the roll is made, because before the roll is made, you don't know if you need the modifier. And when you have such a limited resource like this is extremely limited, you run out very, very quickly. Not knowing beforehand makes a big difference. Still, if I could use a reaction to apply a d6 penalty to somebody's saving throw before I cast a spell at them that requires a saving throw, that's still really good. So, having played a Stars Druid, what I can tell you is those d6s, they run out very quickly. A 6th level Stars Druid can do this 3 times per long rest. That's not a lot. Still, this is a decent feature. Our 10th level feature scales our starry form, so the damage option does an additional d8, the healing option does an additional d8, and the concentration boost now includes a 20-foot fly speed with hover. And all these scalings are nice, but not overwhelmingly potent for the level. Stars really brings it, right at level 2 though, and I don't think you'll ever be disappointed with a Stars Druid. And I think this is our first Druid that hits the B rank. And that brings us to our final subclass, the Circle of Wildfire. This subclass was introduced in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. We start out with our circle spells, not unlike Spores and Land Druids, except in this case, there's no bonus cantrip, but instead we get 2 first level spells prepared, for a total of 10 spells over 9 levels. Like with all the circle spells features, this one is a mixed bag. One thing that is a disappointment is the best spells here were available to druids anyways. But it's still extra preparations, so that's always nice. The iconic feature we get at 2nd level is our Wildfire Spirit. This gives us an alternate use of our Wild Shape feature where we can summon a pet for an hour. And I'll mention that if we want, the Spirit basically gives us a comparable feature to the Star Druid's Archer form, except this one does a d6 plus wisdom damage instead of a d8, so technically 1 point less on average. But we get an hour here instead of 10 minutes, and basically it's a bonus action attack. But the big thing here, and I've talked about this a couple times before, is the fiery teleportation ability. This doesn't just teleport the Wildfire Spirit, but also teleports allies. So it can teleport multiple allies at the same time, and it can do so every round if you like. And it does a bit of fire damage, so this feature would be really good on any class. But on a druid, oh, especially so. Because, as I mentioned earlier, mobility spells are a definite gap in the druid spell list. So instead we get a subclass feature that gives us unlimited teleportation to ourselves and our allies. Yes, it does use up our bonus action to command the spirit, and yes, the range is really small. But this is still huge. I would say it's the standout feature of this subclass by quite a bit. And 2 hours of total duration per short rest, not bad at all. So I think this feature is really, really good on a druid. Good on anyone, really, but on a druid, perfectly placed. And to the players who are disappointed that the Wildfire Druid didn't get Fireball, I'll say that if you could give up Fiery Teleportation and get Fireball prepared for free, and you took that option, I think you made a terrible trade. At level 6, we're going to get Enhanced Bond. This gives us a d8 bonus to a damage roll on a fire spell, or a healing roll on a spell that restores hit points. This is pretty run-of-the-mill. I think you'll notice the bonus on cantrips, and I think you'll notice it on first level spells. On higher level spells, it's going to feel pretty small. So this is okay, but nothing special. Then at level 10 we get God of Rising Flames, which is a more unique feature that again gives some additional fire damage to enemies or healing to allies. In total, the amounts aren't bad, and the feature is decent. So overall, I think Wildfire Druids are pretty good. The circle spells are okay, of course, and our level 6 and 10th level features are fine. But the Wildfire Spirit really stands out. Gives us and our allies mobility, basically really unmatched in the game. And that definitely takes what would have been a C ranking and puts it into a strong B ranking for me. And that is all our druids. And as you can see, we go right from C ranks up to S ranks. Strangely, I noticed that my favorite druids happen to all be in the B and C ranks. But top to bottom in order, we have Moon Druids, Shepherd, Wildfire, Stars, Spores, Land, and finally Dreams. And here's our ranking so far in order. Next time we're going to be looking at fighters, and this is going to be one of the bigger ones because we have 10 subclasses to go through. So I hope you'll join me for that. Otherwise, until next time, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks everybody, and I'll talk to you soon.